Flight attendant slapped elderly black man. His son owned the company. How could a single moment lead to consequences no one expected? And what happens when one decision changes everything? Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're so glad you're here to share another unforgettable story with us. If you enjoy powerful stories about justice, compassion, and unexpected twists, be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. Your support means the world to us, and we truly appreciate you being part of this growing community. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, what do you think matters more in moments of conflict? First impressions or treating every person with respect? Now, settle in, because this story begins with one shocking moment aboard a routine flight that no one on board would ever forget. The way you treat a stranger says more about you than any title ever could. The first-class cabin was wrapped in the quiet hum of cruising altitude, where the soft glow of reading lights reflected across polished armrests and crystal-clear windows stretching above endless white clouds. Flight 728 from Charlotte to Seattle had been in the air for just over an hour, and everything seemed to be moving with the effortless precision passengers expected from one of America's most prestigious airlines. Business executives reviewed presentations on sleek laptops. A young couple quietly celebrated an anniversary with sparkling water. An elderly woman knitted a tiny blue blanket for the grandchild she had yet to meet. Then there was Nathan Brooks. At 72 years old, the elderly black man sat quietly by the window in seat 2A, his weathered hands resting gently on a worn leather carry-on that looked older than many of the passengers around him. His navy jacket had been carefully pressed, though its cuffs showed years of faithful use. His polished brown shoes had been repaired more than once, not because he couldn't afford another pair, but because he believed good things deserved to be cared for instead of replaced. Every few minutes he glanced outside at the bright afternoon sky with the quiet wonder of someone who never took simple blessings for granted. Most people aboard never noticed him. Those who did offered only a brief glance before returning to their own lives. Nathan didn't seem to mind. He smiled softly whenever a flight attendant walked past, always answering with a polite, "Thank you, ma'am," or "I appreciate it." Years of teaching history at a public high school had shaped his voice into one that carried warmth instead of volume. Even in retirement, kindness had become as natural to him as breathing. A few rows away, Emily Carter adjusted the sleeves of her perfectly fitted uniform before checking the passenger manifest on her tablet. At 31, she had earned a reputation for flawless service and strict professionalism. She believed appearances revealed character. Expensive watches suggested success. Designer luggage hinted at importance. Wrinkled clothes often meant trouble. It was a habit she had never questioned because, in her experience, first impressions usually felt accurate. As she moved gracefully through first class, greeting frequent flyers by name and offering refreshments with practiced confidence, her eyes paused for a moment on Nathan. His old carry-on, his simple jacket, his quiet presence. Something about him didn't seem to match the luxury surrounding him. Emily looked down at the seating chart once more before looking back towards seat 2A, a faint crease forming between her brows. Around them, sunlight poured through the cabin windows, painting long golden reflections across the aisle while the engines maintained their steady rhythm somewhere beyond the aluminum walls. Everything still appeared calm. Every passenger believed the flight would continue like any other. No one realized that within the next few minutes, one misunderstanding would transform an ordinary afternoon into a story that would reach far beyond this airplane, leaving every witness questioning how quickly people judge someone they have never truly seen. Nathan Brooks noticed the hesitation in Emily Carter's eyes long before she reached his seat. After decades of teaching teenagers how to read history, he had become equally skilled at reading people. He recognized uncertainty, impatience, and quiet judgment without needing a single word spoken. Yet he greeted her with the same gentle smile he offered everyone. "Good afternoon, ma'am," he said as she stopped beside him with the beverage cart. "Could I please have a cup of water whenever you have a moment?" Emily nodded politely, but her attention drifted back to the passenger list displayed on her tablet. Seat 2 Alpha, Nathan Brooks. The reservation had been booked less than 48 hours earlier using an executive corporate account that normally belonged to senior leadership. She frowned almost imperceptibly before handing him a glass of chilled water. "Enjoy your flight, sir," she replied with professional courtesy, though something continued to bother her. Nathan thanked her sincerely before reaching into his jacket pocket and removing a faded photograph that had clearly traveled with him for years. The edges were worn, and the colors had softened with time. It showed a much younger Nathan standing beside a smiling little boy outside a modest brick house. The boy could not have been older than 8. Nathan traced the corner of the photograph with his thumb before quietly placing it back inside his pocket. Across the aisle, a businessman noticed the picture and smiled. "Family?" he asked kindly. Nathan returned the smile. "My son," he answered with unmistakable pride. "He has always worked harder than I ever did." The businessman chuckled. "Coming to visit him?" Nathan nodded. "He finally convinced me to stop driving across 3 states. He insisted I let him arrange everything this time." There was no boasting in Nathan's voice, only the simple joy of a father looking forward to seeing his child. The conversation ended as naturally as it had begun, leaving behind a peaceful silence filled only by the gentle vibration of the engines. Meanwhile, Emily continued preparing the meal service, but the reservation kept returning to her thoughts. She quietly approached another flight attendant named Lauren. "Did you notice the gentleman in 2 Alpha?" she whispered. Lauren glanced toward Nathan before smiling. "He seems very sweet." Emily lowered her voice. "That is exactly what confuses me. Executive bookings usually belong to board members, major investors, or celebrities. I have never seen someone like him traveling under that account." Lauren shrugged. "Maybe someone upgraded him." "It happens." Emily nodded, but the explanation did not satisfy her. She had built her career on noticing details others overlooked, and her confidence in those instincts had rarely been challenged. As the aircraft encountered a brief patch of light turbulence, the seatbelt sign illuminated with a soft chime. Nathan carefully secured his seatbelt and placed both hands on his carry-on bag, as though protecting something valuable inside. Through the cabin windows, brilliant sunlight reflected across endless layers of white clouds, creating the illusion that the airplane was floating above an endless sea of light. Nathan closed his eyes for a moment, quietly grateful for the journey. Emily watched him from the galley, still convinced that something about the situation did not add up. She did not realize that within minutes, one small misunderstanding would test not only her judgment, but the values she believed had guided her entire career. Nathan Brooks waited patiently until the seatbelt sign switched off again before reaching toward the overhead compartment. He moved slowly, careful not to disturb the passengers around him. Inside the compartment rested a small garment bag that held the only suit he owned, one he planned to wear for dinner with his son that evening. As he carefully pulled the bag halfway toward him, the zipper on his old carry-on unexpectedly caught the edge of the compartment. His leather wallet slipped free, bounced once against the armrest, and slid quietly across the carpeted aisle before coming to rest near the polished shoes of another passenger. "Oh dear," Nathan said softly, immediately bending to retrieve it. Before he could reach the wallet, Emily Carter turned the corner from the forward galley carrying a tray of coffee cups. From where she stood, she saw only an elderly passenger leaning into the aisle while another guest stood nearby. Her heartbeat quickened. In the fast-paced environment of commercial aviation, crew members were trained to react immediately whenever they believed cabin safety or passenger comfort might be affected. Emily set the tray onto the service counter and walked briskly toward the scene. "Sir," she said firmly, "please remain in your assigned seat." Nathan looked up at once, surprised by the urgency in her voice. "I am sorry, ma'am," he replied calmly. "My wallet slipped away from me. I was only trying to pick it up." The businessman across the aisle immediately pointed toward the floor. "It is right here," he offered politely, preparing to hand it back. But Emily had already formed a conclusion in her mind. She glanced at Nathan's simple clothing, then toward the executive reservation listed on her tablet, and the doubt she had been carrying throughout the flight quietly hardened into certainty. Something felt wrong to her, even though she had no evidence beyond instinct. "Sir," she repeated, her tone becoming noticeably colder. "I need you to stay exactly where you are while I verify your seating assignment." Nathan blinked with quiet confusion. "Of course," he answered without hesitation. "Whatever you need." The nearby passengers exchanged uncertain glances. Lauren, watching from several rows back, sensed the growing tension and slowly approached. "Emily," she whispered gently, "I think everything is fine." Emily barely acknowledged her colleague. Instead, she opened the passenger manifest once more and studied the reservation. The executive corporate account still stared back at her. She looked again at Nathan, whose hands now rested peacefully in his lap while he waited with remarkable patience. There was no frustration in his face, no raised voice, no complaint, only quiet dignity. Outside the windows, the afternoon sun bathed the clouds in brilliant gold, making the cabin appear almost peaceful despite the uncomfortable silence settling over first class. Even the conversations around them gradually faded. Several passengers lowered their newspapers. Others discreetly removed their headphones. Everyone sensed that an ordinary misunderstanding was beginning to grow into something much larger. Nathan finally offered another gentle smile, hoping to ease the tension. "Please take your time," he said warmly. "There is no rush." His kindness only deepened the silence, while Emily remained convinced that asking one more question would confirm everything she already believed, unaware that the answer waiting just a few moments away would challenge every assumption she had made since boarding the aircraft. Nathan Brooks remained seated exactly as requested, his hands folded quietly over his weathered leather carry-on, while Emily Carter stood beside him with professional composure that concealed the growing certainty in her mind. She took a slow breath before speaking again. "Sir, may I please see your boarding pass and a photo identification?" Her tone was courteous, yet noticeably firmer than before. Nathan smiled gently and reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. "Of course, ma'am. I completely understand." He carefully handed over his driver's license along with the neatly folded boarding pass his son had printed for him before the trip. Emily examined both documents. The names matched perfectly. Nathan Brooks. Seat 2 Alpha. Nothing appeared incorrect. Yet the executive reservation code displayed on her tablet continued to trouble her. She looked back and forth between the documents and the elderly man sitting quietly before her, struggling to reconcile the information with the assumptions she had already accepted as truth. "Did someone arrange this reservation for you?" she asked. Nathan nodded with an easy smile. "Yes, my son insisted. He told me I had spent enough years sitting in economy and wanted me to experience something different." Emily glanced toward Lauren, who had now stopped only a few feet away. Lauren offered a reassuring smile to Nathan before quietly saying, "Everything seems to match, Emily." But Emily still hesitated. Years of training had taught her to trust procedures, and years of personal experience had convinced her that unusual situations often hid larger problems. She lowered her voice. "Sir, may I ask what your son does for a living?" Nathan chuckled softly, the kind of warm laugh that reminded people of a favorite teacher rather than a stranger. "He works very hard. That is what I have always been proud of." Emily waited for more, but Nathan simply smiled, clearly more interested in speaking about his son's character than his profession. Around them, first class had grown unusually quiet. The businessman across the aisle folded his newspaper without taking his eyes off the conversation. The elderly woman with the knitting needles paused in the middle of another stitch. Even the young couple celebrating their anniversary exchanged uncertain glances. The soft hum of the engines now seemed louder than the voices inside the cabin. Nathan noticed the uncomfortable silence settling around him. He leaned slightly forward and spoke with genuine kindness. "If I have caused any concern, I truly apologize. I never intended to interrupt anyone's work." Lauren looked at him with sympathy. "You have not done anything wrong, sir." Emily remained silent. Her eyes drifted once more toward Nathan's old carry-on. A faded baggage tag from nearly 15 years earlier still hung from one handle. The corners of the bag had been repaired with careful stitching instead of replaced. Everything about the man suggested simplicity, modesty, and a lifetime of careful living. Everything except the reservation attached to his name. Then, just as Emily prepared to return his identification, a notification suddenly appeared on her tablet. An internal message from airline headquarters flashed across the screen, requesting immediate confirmation that a very important guest had boarded safely under confidential executive travel arrangements. Emily's pulse quickened. The message did not reveal the passenger's identity, only the reservation number. She slowly compared the number on the alert with the boarding pass still resting in her hand. They matched exactly. For the first time since the flight had departed, uncertainty replaced confidence, and a quiet feeling settled deep inside her that she might be standing at the edge of a mistake whose consequences were far greater than she could possibly imagine. Nathan Brooks noticed the brief change in Emily Carter's expression as she stared at the glowing screen of her tablet. For the first time since she had approached his seat, the confidence that had guided every question seemed to falter. She quietly stepped into the forward galley and tapped the intercom to contact the lead purser. "I need you to verify something," she said in a measured voice. "I just received an executive notification tied to Seat 2 Alpha." Within seconds, the lead purser, Michael Reynolds, joined her. He reviewed the message carefully before lifting his eyes toward Nathan. "The reservation number is correct," Michael said quietly. "Headquarters marked this passenger as confidential. We are instructed to provide exceptional service and avoid unnecessary attention." Emily frowned. "That cannot be right. There has to be some mistake." Michael looked at the boarding pass once more. "Everything matches." Emily lowered her voice even further. "Then why was I never informed?" Michael answered honestly. "Because confidential executive travel is sometimes handled above the cabin crew level." The explanation settled over the galley like a heavy cloud. Emily glanced once more toward Nathan, who remained exactly where she had asked him to stay. He was looking out the window again, watching the brilliant afternoon sunlight stretch across endless layers of white clouds. In his lap rested the old photograph of his son, now held gently between both hands. He smiled to himself for a brief moment before carefully placing it back inside his jacket. Across the aisle, the businessman leaned slightly toward Nathan. "Everything all right?" he asked kindly. Nathan gave a warm nod. "I believe so. Everyone is simply doing their job." His answer carried no frustration, no sarcasm, and no hint of resentment. Michael noticed that response and quietly sighed. "He has been nothing but respectful," he murmured. Emily did not answer. Deep inside, two competing instincts were pulling her in opposite directions. One urged her to accept the documents, trust the system, and move on. The other whispered that appearances still did not fit the reservation. She had relied on that instinct throughout her career, and abandoning it now felt strangely difficult. At that very moment, another priority message appeared on every crew tablet aboard the aircraft. The captain had forwarded an internal notice directly from corporate headquarters. It instructed the entire cabin crew to extend personal courtesy to the confidential executive guest immediately after landing, because senior leadership would be meeting the passenger at the arrival gate. No names appeared in the message, only the reservation number. Emily compared it once again with Nathan's boarding pass. It was identical. Lauren looked over her shoulder and quietly said, "Emily, I think we should simply apologize for the misunderstanding and let him enjoy the rest of his flight." Emily remained silent for several long seconds. Finally, she walked back toward Nathan's seat, her polished shoes making almost no sound against the carpet. Every nearby passenger instinctively watched her approach. The cabin had become so quiet that even the distant hum of the engines seemed unusually loud. Nathan looked up with the same gentle smile he had worn since boarding. "Is everything sorted out?" he asked softly. Emily paused before answering. The words she chose next would determine whether this flight ended as an ordinary misunderstanding or became the beginning of a story that every person on board would remember for the rest of their lives. Nathan Brooks looked into Emily Carter's uneasy eyes and offered the same gentle smile that had never left his face since boarding the aircraft. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. "Everything is perfectly all right. Thank you for checking." His answer caught her off guard. There was no irritation in his voice, no attempt to embarrass her in front of the passengers, only quiet patience. Emily handed back his boarding pass and driver's license with noticeably slower movements than before. "Thank you for your cooperation, sir," she replied, though the confidence that had colored her voice earlier had faded into uncertainty. Nathan accepted the documents with both hands. "You have an important job," he said warmly. "Keeping people safe is never easy." Emily nodded politely before stepping away, but his words lingered in her mind far longer than she expected. The meal service resumed, and conversations gradually returned throughout the cabin. Glasses clinked softly against polished tray tables. Fresh coffee filled the air with a rich aroma while sunlight drifted across the windows, turning the endless clouds outside into ribbons of gold. Nathan quietly unfolded a small cloth napkin and carefully removed a homemade sandwich wrapped in wax paper. He had prepared it himself before leaving home because he hated wasting food. Before taking the first bite, he noticed the elderly woman across the aisle struggling to open a small package of crackers with trembling fingers. Without drawing attention to himself, Nathan reached into his bag, removed a clean napkin, and gently offered to help. "May I?" he asked kindly. The woman smiled with relief. "Thank you. These little packages always win." Nathan laughed softly as he opened it and handed it back. "Not today." Several nearby passengers noticed the exchange. The businessman who had spoken with Nathan earlier smiled quietly before returning to his newspaper. Lauren also saw the moment from the galley. She glanced toward Emily, who had been watching without realizing it. "He really is exactly who he appears to be," Lauren whispered. Emily did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked down at the executive notification still displayed on her tablet. It no longer seemed important. Her attention had shifted to something much more difficult to explain. Nathan had been questioned, delayed, and quietly singled out. Yet he continued treating everyone around him with effortless respect. That kind of character could not be printed on a boarding pass or measured by a reservation code. It revealed itself only in ordinary moments. Emily slowly walked to the window beside the galley and stared out at the brilliant horizon. The afternoon sun reflected across the wing, bathing the cabin in warm amber light. She remembered something her own father had told her years earlier when she first became a flight attendant. "Every passenger is carrying a story you cannot see." She had believed those words once. Somewhere along the way, she had allowed appearances to become louder than people. Behind her, Nathan quietly folded the wax paper from his sandwich and placed every crumb back inside so the cabin would remain clean for the crew. He thanked another flight attendant for refilling his water, even though she had apologized for the delay. Nothing about his behavior demanded recognition, yet every small gesture quietly reshaped the atmosphere around him. As the captain announced that the aircraft had begun its gradual descent into Seattle, the cabin lights dimmed slightly. Seatbacks returned upright. Window shades lifted. Outside, the city slowly appeared beneath scattered clouds. None of the passengers realized that the most important arrival waiting below was not listed on any public schedule, and within only a few more minutes, every quiet act of grace Nathan had shown would stand in remarkable contrast to a truth that was about to leave the entire cabin speechless. The aircraft rolled smoothly toward the gate, while the familiar sound of seat belts clicking open echoed throughout the cabin. Passengers reached for briefcases and jackets, eager to continue with their day, but the cabin crew remained unusually still. Moments before the aircraft door was scheduled to open, the captain's voice came over the intercom once again. "Ladies and gentlemen, we ask that everyone remain seated for just a few extra moments while we welcome members of our executive leadership team on board." A wave of quiet curiosity moved through first class. Business travelers exchanged puzzled looks. The businessman across from Nathan lowered his newspaper once again. Even the elderly woman stopped folding her knitting supplies. Emily Carter glanced toward Michael Reynolds. "Executive leadership?" she whispered. Michael nodded slowly. "That matches the confidential notification." The aircraft door finally unlocked with a soft mechanical sound. Cool Seattle air drifted into the front galley as the jet bridge connected to the aircraft. Instead of airport personnel, several sharply dressed executives stepped through the doorway. Dark suits, corporate identification badges, calm but purposeful expressions. Behind them walked a tall man in his mid-40s with silver hair beginning to appear at his temples and the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected thousands of people. Every crew member immediately recognized him. Daniel Brooks, President and Chief Executive Officer of the airline. Emily instinctively straightened her uniform. Michael offered a respectful greeting. "Good afternoon, Mr. Brooks." Daniel acknowledged him with a brief nod, but he did not stop. He did not greet the crew. He did not look toward the executives following behind him. Instead, his eyes searched the cabin with growing urgency until they settled on seat 2 Alpha. His serious expression softened instantly. Without hesitation, he walked directly down the aisle, passing every executive and every passenger who instinctively moved aside. Nathan looked up, surprised for only a brief second before a warm smile spread across his face. Daniel stopped beside him, his eyes glistening with unmistakable emotion. "Dad," he said quietly, "I am so sorry I could not be here when you boarded." Nathan stood slowly, and father and son embraced with the kind of effortless affection that needed no explanation. The entire cabin fell into complete silence. Emily felt the color leave her face. Lauren covered her mouth in disbelief. Michael lowered his eyes as the reality settled over him. The businessman across the aisle stared in stunned amazement. Nathan gently patted his son's shoulder. "You work hard enough already," he said with a soft laugh. "You did not have to leave your meetings for me." Daniel smiled. "There is no meeting more important than making sure my father is welcomed properly." One of the senior vice presidents quietly stepped forward and handed Daniel a tablet. "Sir," he whispered, "the board members are waiting downstairs." Daniel accepted it without taking his eyes off Nathan. Then his attention slowly shifted toward the cabin crew. His expression remained calm, but there was unmistakable disappointment behind his eyes. Emily suddenly remembered every assumption she had made, every unnecessary question she had asked, every quiet judgment she had allowed to shape her actions. The polished cabin that had seemed so elegant only minutes earlier now felt unbearably silent. Nathan noticed her standing motionless near the galley. Instead of anger, he offered her the same gentle smile he had shown from the beginning of the journey. That simple act of grace left everyone watching with a question far greater than who Nathan Brooks really was. It made them wonder whether true character belonged to the people with authority or to the man who had quietly carried dignity through every moment of misunderstanding. Nathan Brooks gently stepped aside from the aisle, allowing the other passengers to leave first, exactly as he had done his entire life by placing the comfort of others ahead of his own. Daniel Brooks remained beside him, carrying the old leather bag his father had tried to lift himself only moments earlier. The senior executives waited respectfully near the aircraft door, but no one rushed the elderly man. The atmosphere inside the cabin had changed completely. It was no longer defined by schedules or procedures. It was defined by reflection. Emily Carter finally gathered enough courage to walk forward. Her hands were steady, but her voice was not. "Mr. Brooks," she said softly, looking first at Nathan instead of Daniel, "I owe you an apology." Nathan turned toward her with calm eyes that carried neither resentment nor triumph. Emily continued, "I allowed my assumptions to become stronger than my judgment. You treated me with respect every minute of this flight, even when I gave you reasons not to. I am deeply sorry." The surrounding passengers remained silent. No one reached for a phone. No one whispered. They simply listened. Daniel looked toward his father before speaking. "Dad, you do not have to accept that apology because of me." Nathan smiled gently. "I would never accept it because of you," he answered. "I would accept it because people deserve the chance to become better than they were yesterday." Emily lowered her eyes, visibly moved by the quiet grace in his words. Nathan continued speaking, not only to her, but to everyone still standing in the cabin. "Respect is a gift we choose to give before we know someone's story. If we wait until a title, a position, or a bank account convinces us, then it is not really respect. It is convenience." The words settled into the cabin more deeply than any announcement made during the flight. Even the executives behind Daniel exchanged thoughtful glances. Michael Reynolds quietly removed his captain-style service pin and slipped it into his pocket, suddenly aware that years of experience still left room for humility. Lauren smiled through tearful eyes, grateful that kindness had become the loudest voice on board. Daniel finally spoke again. "Our company spends millions of dollars every year teaching service standards. Today my father reminded us that character cannot be taught by a handbook alone." He turned toward the executives. "Beginning next month, every new employee, including every executive, will complete a new customer respect program built around one principle. Every passenger deserves dignity before they deserve recognition." No one questioned the decision. No one argued. It felt less like a policy change and more like a promise. Nathan looked around the cabin one final time. His eyes paused briefly on the elderly woman he had helped earlier with the package of crackers. She smiled warmly and gave him a quiet nod. The businessman who had shared a conversation with him reached out to shake his hand. "Thank you," he said simply. Nathan returned the handshake with the same humility he had carried throughout the journey. As father and son slowly walked toward the open aircraft door together, The afternoon sunlight streamed through the entrance, surrounding them in a warm golden glow. There were no dramatic speeches waiting outside, no celebration, no applause. Only a quiet understanding shared by everyone who had witnessed the flight that the greatest measure of a person had never been hidden inside an executive reservation, but inside the ordinary choices they made when no one believed they mattered. 3 months passed, and the story of that quiet afternoon flight never became a headline because Nathan Brooks never wanted it to. He declined every interview request, refused every invitation to appear on television, and politely asked the airline not to mention his name in any public statement. "If people only learn because they recognize my face," he told Daniel one evening, "then they missed the lesson." Instead, the change happened quietly, just as Nathan preferred. At training centers across the country, every new employee began watching a short presentation built around one simple principle. Every passenger carries a story you cannot see. Uniforms, luggage, clothing, age, race, and appearance could never replace curiosity, patience, and respect. Emily Carter volunteered to help teach the new program. During every session, she shared her own mistake without hiding behind excuses. She never mentioned titles or executive positions. She simply described how quickly assumptions can become barriers and how easily kindness can disappear when people stop seeing the human being in front of them. Her honesty earned something more valuable than sympathy. It earned trust. One crisp autumn morning, Nathan returned to the airport for another visit, this time traveling only to spend the weekend with his grandchildren. He walked through the terminal carrying the same repaired leather bag and wearing the same carefully pressed navy jacket. Nothing about him had changed. As he approached the boarding gate, a young gate agent smiled warmly before saying, "Good morning, sir. May I help you with your bag?" Nathan thanked her with his familiar, gentle smile. Nearby, Emily noticed him from across the terminal. She walked over, not as someone trying to erase the past, but as someone grateful for the chance to live differently because of it. "It is good to see you again," she said. Nathan nodded. "It is good to see you smiling." Before boarding began, Emily quietly handed Nathan a handwritten envelope. Inside was a simple note. "Thank you for teaching me that dignity should never depend on first impressions. I hope every passenger I serve from this day forward feels the respect you showed me before I earned it." Nathan folded the letter carefully and placed it beside the old photograph of Daniel inside his jacket pocket. Some memories reminded people of pain. Others reminded them of growth. This one would always remind him that forgiveness could change more lives than anger ever could. As the boarding announcement echoed gently through the terminal, Nathan stepped toward the jet bridge once again. Sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows, stretching long reflections across the polished floor. Behind him, employees greeted passengers with warmer voices, slower steps, and more attentive eyes than before. Ahead of him waited another ordinary flight, another ordinary group of strangers, each carrying invisible joys and unseen burdens. Nathan paused for one brief moment and looked back with quiet gratitude before continuing forward. Sometimes the greatest victories are not celebrated with applause or headlines. Sometimes they live in the small decisions people make after they have learned to see one another with open hearts. And as the aircraft disappeared into the bright blue sky above Seattle, one truth remained stronger than every title, every uniform, and every position of power. Kindness is never weakness. It is the strongest legacy anyone can leave behind.